Have a gosh dang beaver darn great damn day.
And welcome back to the Great Beaver Fiasco, part 2 of our special edition with local Beaver Dam poet Michael Belongie. And by the way, you could also subscribe and listen to your favorite episodes of the Great Beaver Fiasco on Spotify and Podbean, also as Supper Club Media on YouTube. And Michael, when we were setting up this conversation, trying to focus, and this is the difficulty, I believe last week you mentioned the Emily Dickinson poem about words, and it is a really difficult thing to take just a couple words to try to shift your mind, because if you have too many, you have too large a picture, and if you only have one, it's a very small slit to view the world. What poem best reflects your life, Michael? What surmises your life experiences?
I would begin with a significant insight by William Carlos Williams, who is considered a significant modernist as a poet. And to make it a contemporary poetry, he offered this. He said, "It is difficult to get news from poems, yet men die miserably, and women, every day for the lack of what is found there." And I believe as a poet, why am I taking this energy to offer my gifts, talents to this art? It's for that purpose, to enrich, enlarge other people's views that beauty, even sometimes what we consider grotesque, is actually beauty.
So even the things we think are vile or grotesque have a certain beauty. Would something like death fall into that category, or something more literal, like a snail or a slug?
Yes, and I have found poets that have done amazing works on such species of creation, slugs and bird flights, and actual moments where one bird of prey is dealing with another's capture, and it's symbiosis that we're in this together. I would like presently for Thomas to read the poem Subtraction, because I believe this is a poem that has the art and the movement that I believe has a good effects on the listener.
Subtraction. Daffodils and heady hyacinth punctuate the spring palette. Gather the bouquet. Disregard. Then subtract health, obligations, entitlements, regrets, guilt. Empty. Recalculate the balance. Heartbeat with another breath.
And that is a tempo that's very much with a Buddhist tempo. And that is one of the gifts that I have been offered by reading so many fine authors of the Buddhist traditions.
Michael, when you verbalize a piece of poetry like that, when you're the orator, when you're the one who is going to be presenting that and it is a piece that maybe on its face doesn't have an obvious tempo. It's not necessarily in 4/4 time. How, if somebody were to ask you, Michael, how do I read subtraction? What is, philosophically, how should this be verbally presented? What answer would you give them?
I would give you this observation. When you hear tapes of Robert Frost stopping by woods on a snowy evening, his reading is profoundly inept. So I would defer to Thomas, who articulated the poem Subtraction with articulate artistry, I would say. So I would say I wouldn't mind a reader that can read as well as Thomas.
Michael, I know you brought a number of your poems with you. Could you please read one to us right now?
Yes, and particularly this poem, Open, has a very minimalist Buddhist tempo and focus. And it begins with a quote from Pema Chodron. But we find as practitioners, nothing goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Oh, we are cavalier, outlier, in seeming charmed decades. Then sword hovers. Or is it lotus flower? Stamen, pistil sheathed in petals, and its stem anchored in silt. Its medium, impermanence, suffering, and our surrender.
So, Michael, I'm not familiar with that poem. That is the first time that I've been exposed to that piece of work of yours. I've read many of your pieces of work. I've had the opportunity to read read it, some of it in front of a group of people. I'm not a necessarily somebody who is educated in deciphering poetry, but my takeaway from a piece like that is that perhaps you selected it because we're seeing the blossoms come on the trees here. We are experiencing spring here in the Midwest, slowly but surely. So I feel like the idea of the lotus and the pistils and the references to flowers may hold some of that. But then, there's other imagery in there about suffering. And I don't know if on my first brush through reading that, I've got the totality of the picture yet, which I think is part of the beauty of poetry, right? I mean, poetry might not always... Poetry isn't meant to be understood the first time necessarily, is it?
Absolutely requires a processing. The words have organic tension, and that organic tension re-examined takes you to other levels. In our Western mindset, we have the hyacinths and lilac, and in the East we have more of our water lily. The amazing part of the lotus is it's absolutely stunning in its color and the stamen, the large stamen in the very rich gold, and that beauty is all saned from muck. And this is, to me, the power that from our suffering there is some blossom, and that is the powerful, what I say, organic movement within the poem. And it's really a non-statement. The more you take a poem and dissect it, it's if your biology teacher takes, for God's sakes, a kitten and puts chlorophyll on its mouth and dissects it after that, it would be a horror. There'd be very few people going into science or medicine with that. So poetry is an art. You can't have people say, I wonder how they layered this very thick oil on this canvas. Let's take a razor blade and scrape some of it off. Oh my, that would be the destruction of the artwork. So,
But you're not saying don't read it twice.
read it. There are poems that I read every night.
Mm-hmm.
That they just bring a certain sense of importance for that day reviewed. I think of one, and one of those that I read every night has this idea, and the kind of sleep that you have when you leave all of this go. I mean, that's what this poetry of the sleep is. We absolutely have to have this resetting every night if we're to remain healthy. And poetry sometimes can offer you that, rather than a recounting of the news today would likely be a total assuredness you will not sleep that night.
Now that we've had some insight from the author and a bit of a diversion and a chance to breathe, could you read that poem of yours for us for a second time?
Certainly. And again, this is very much Buddhist. The title is Open. And the quote from Pema Chodron, but we find as practitioners, nothing goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Oh, we are cavalier, outlier, in seeming charmed decades. Then sword hovers. Or is it lotus flower? Stamen, pistil sheathed in petals, and its stems anchored in silt. Its medium, impermanence, suffering, and our surrender. Very Buddhist thoughts that we never name things, because once we name things, we are allowing ourselves to be placed in a permanence that we don't want to be in.
But isn't that what poetry is? One of the functions of poetry is to find words for that which had not had words before?
Absolutely, and it's infinitesimal. What are the opportunities? And every poet has this idea, what will my last poem be? And I have written that poem a few decades back, and I'm not going to rewrite it because that last poem just does offer a sense of the wonder and the beauty, the lyricism that was embedded within my pursuit of that art of poetry.
Michael, you said that you can't take oil painting and just chip away the layers of paint and get down and learn what it's about. But can you follow us in our folly in an exercise to do that with your poem? Can you tell me, if you recall, what was going through your mind as you wrote it, in terms of, and I want to maybe go back to this concept of rhythm that we brought up earlier, is do you find yourself when you writing to have a certain rhythm? Do you find that you get more out of your writing when you take an alliterative approach, or is there something else?
At this stage, I believe the unconscious is a wealth of opportunities, and that when I review the 7 books that I've published, it's evident to me, well, there was a good run of alliteration here, yet I believe as all artists, sculptures and oil paint and dancing, musicians, it all has to do with that moment as an artist is having something germinate within. That's a part of the art process also. And once a person activates, it's a poem, let's say it's the preliminary sketch of what the art work is going to have as form, I believe that it is a out of mind consciousness. You go to the unconscious, and I've watched artists do particularly important works and stages, and I'm always amazed how it is mysterious where it goes in its final piece of its finished. So I believe that is just there's a great deal of mystery in the art of any of our arts, a mystery that we just have no way of expressing that particular unknown.
I'm going to futilely attempt to peel away another layer.
Yes.
And ask you this question. As you, as a poet, go to the ether where you say the poets may get these ideas, when you find yourself, however wordlessly, find yourself attaching to that muse, you find yourself following the path toward a certain idea that you're articulating. Could you describe your thought process maybe as it relates to trying to keep the purity of that idea in place versus form, versus, as I mentioned before, rhythm, but also the, let's call it, institutional, educational rubric of English literature, alliteration. Again, putting these two ideas together, the idea of the subject and the form. How do you balance that as you create? Give us an example of where your mind might go as you balance those two ideas.
Oftentimes, as the draft of a poem is written, I have one that I'm particularly at right now, and it is necessarily all dependent on metaphor, and as they tell us, all metaphor is limp because they can't actually actuate what is the perfect syllables or word sound. And I think as you speak of this organism, it is an organic process within art. And your Carbondale alma mater ought to be proud of you, the way you were dealing with such transcendental examinations of art. It was very good. That this is an opportunity for people in the audience to appreciate. Mystery is all about us. It always has to be about us. We don't have all the specifics. What if Van Gogh had not eventually ended his own life? Where would he have gone from there? It's so untenable how you could imagine what would be happening. And this idea of artists saying, I can't explain it to you. I just have to do it. It just this is who the muse is directing. We have to go to something like their muses, because sometimes you look at your poem and say, I couldn't have written this. It's well above my grade of poetry. Well, it happens sometimes. And that's why poets are often very difficult to be in large groups with, because it's all like, you can't have 600 poets. Okay, I want to read my poem. Well, you can't have 600 people read their poem unless you want to have a 3-day poetry overdose. Because it is impossible. But I think, Craig, you've really come into a very esoteric but important thought that it's always going to be a mystery. I can't tell you what poetry will be. It's evolving. I can tell you, it seems to me, poetry needs to be as articulate as it can possibly be, and that the human experience is Homo sapiens, whatever is that evolution in its time. And we do have that gift of intelligence that we found no other particular sentient has.
What does Michael Belongie, the poet, do? Let me take that back. What does Michael Belongie, the college-educated individual who understands the concept of grammar and written language, what does that Michael Belongie do when Michael Belongie, the poet, comes up with this idea that is what you write, but it breaks the rules of punctuation, of grammar, of spelling, of indentation, of all of those things?
It's called poetic license, and that poetic license is what I believe I have had in the past, in my wallet, a poetic license, and it gave me freedom to do this. I believe for myself, I am very little inclined to be a iconoclast. If you wish to be E.E. Cummings and have no capitalization and no commas and periods, E.E. Cummings does it well. And it offers a freedom from other following poets to say, yes. It's like free verse. Had they not had free verse, poetry would be in a state of dysfunction like you can't believe. I wanted to introduce an asceticism about where I am right now as a person, and that this was a question brought to me, and reading it out loud just says to me, I really adhere to these thoughts, and they become for me a let's say they're my walking plan of how I want to continue my life. It says for my life, I must distance myself from myself, see myself in perspective as I really am. I mean, a creature, wonderfully yet fearfully made, a bundle of paradoxes and contradictions. I believe and I doubt. I hope and despair. I love and defer to hate. I just added defer because I just can't say that. I defer to hate. I am exciting and boring, enchanted and disillusioned, manic and depressive. I'm cool on the outside and hurt within. I feel bad about feeling good. Am afraid of my joy. Feel guilty if I don't feel guilty. I'm trusting and suspicious. Selfless and selfish. Wide open and locked in. I know so much and so little. I'm honest and still play games. Aristotle defined us humans as rational animals. I suggest we are fallen angels with an incredible capacity. And this word for word is Walter Burghardt, a Jesuit. And he certainly has been cloned to me. I think that's how I feel.
And we are speaking with Michael Belongie here as part of National Poetry Month, the month of April. And one of the things that you've said today, Michael, that's really stuck with me is this idea of the role that poetry plays in your life every day. You said you have some poems that you read before you go to bed, week in, week out, whatever that may be. Give us some insight into why you feel that's important, and what would you recommend we read in our own day-to-day lives?
I would believe that the printed word's all about you being the lens. You choose whatever gratifies or stimulates or offers new hope in your life. That every moment is your now opportunity. There's only the now that we can actually navigate within. And that is very much a Buddhist thought of be present. Be present. In that this passing moment will not be repeated. And each day is that opportunity within the 24 hours to allow yourself the health to have time for rest, sleep, eating, and most important is this working within the context of family, friends, the world that you live in, the world that you are very much vital to be in this present moment. The world's a different place without you here.
I understand you have a piece of poetry that illustrates that thought.
Yes, I've asked Lori to do a daily prompt from this work.
Buddha's little instruction book.
And so we've randomly chosen. This is on page 73, a prompt, which Lori will read.
Harm no other beings. They are just your brothers and sisters.
And as in haiku practice, read it a second time because that is the necessary.
And haiku again is 535.
A haiku, yes, is that Japanese form. This is a Buddhist form, and so this is a prompt that would have one enter into a meditation.
Harm no other beings. They are just your brothers and sisters.
It's a shame more people don't reflect on that on a day-to-day basis.
It's us. It's the positive energy people that make the difference. It can make the difference. It has made the difference. We have had the significant horror of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we have since that time avoided that kind of colossal loss of life. And that is because there are very many good hearts. We always have to believe the good hearts, the inclusivity continues to make the world continue.
There is room for negativity. Is room for those disgusting, I forget the word that was used earlier. There's room for that in poetry as there's room for anything else, I imagine, Michael.
I believe that we have every day the opportunity to examine the mystery all about us. And as we recalled earlier, this reference of prehistoric times in the provinces of France, these people possibly 15,000 years back entered the caves, and in those caves somehow they illumined those walls and left their gift to us, and that's the gift of beauty and our sentient abilities to be artistic. And that is a legacy we need to continue.
And that may even go to include catastrophic events in world history. There's been poetry about the COVID situation that we all found ourselves in that certainly created maybe little more opportunity for people to put pen to paper, but beautiful things came out of that.
Indeed, and I have an amazing poem that was offered by a ordained minister at the very time the portal to this pandemic opened, and none of us had any real insight of what was going to be this history-changing moment, that it's one significant realization: Homo sapiens, our humanity, was affected because we are this Homo sapiens species, and we are the ones that were most endangered. So this is the poem Pandemic.
And this was written by Lynn Unger on March 11th of 2020, which, if I recall, is less than a week before things got pretty hairy.
Yes.
Pandemic. Lynn Unger. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has come clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, as long as we all shall live. Lynn Unger, March 11th, 2020.
It's quite a precedent piece of poetry.
Michael, why did you select this piece for inclusion today in this podcast?
Personally, the fluke of my opening a computer, and the poem was there, and there was a, as Thomas just used, a prescient sense. This is what we are walking into. And I finally, possibly within the middle of this pandemic, wrote my own Beaver Dam poem, which I did not bring today, but it basically was walking to the dam from Hiawatha Drive each day, and it was a very nasty winter, and thinking, well, what else is there to have as a reminder? Even this harsh weather is better than no breathing at all. And that poem is a very fine focal point for this conversation we've had, as this is why poetry is essential to our human experience. This is a poet with a insight that how can this be that a person could be so in the middle of what we have now examined happened? Mystery. It's a mystery.
It's the beauty of poetry, is shining a light on that mystery. And here, as we wind down this podcast and this just wonderfully idyllic and insightful two-part series with Michael Belongie, poet from Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. Michael, I know you selected a piece that you want to close out our conversation with. Can you tell us a little bit about it before you read it?
Yes, I'm going to have a piece that by Robert Lax, Bob Lax, the hermit poet of the Isle of Patmos, a classmate of the Trappist contemplative writer of the 20th century, Thomas Merton. And his particular piece is, in the beginning was love, and I want to read that particular poem followed by a poem of my own. So the Robert Lax poem looks very much, as I'm looking at it, as a paragraph form, it has a sounding as in the beginning was the Word. Of course, he would be using the gospel writer John, because John was exiled to the Isle of Patmos. So how appropriate this is. So his passage about this is from his own funeral at St. Bonaventure's University in 2000. In the beginning was love. Love made us fear. All things grew within it. The sphere then encompassed beginnings and endings, beginning and end. Love had a compass whose whirling dance traced out a sphere of love in the void. In the center thereof rose a fountain. Robert Lax. And then my final poem is a piece entitled Marriage Vow. The gentle dawn soon sparkles from the drops of dew suspended on each blade. Here gentle souls linger and never fret to see wilt what the sun can parch to straw. Be gentle like the moment of embrace. Two souls bared and joined for a moment, free from the scorch of drought.
Well, from the beginning of our conversation to the end here, Michael, it has been insightful and wonderful in what good poetry should do, and that is to provoke thought. And we want to thank you for provoking that thought with us and letting us follow you on your poetic journey on our podcast.
And please subscribe
to The Great Beaver Fiasco.
Perfect.
Beaver Dam, Wisconsin's got peppers and a stage. Beaver Dam, Kentucky's where Bill Monroe first played. Beaver Dam, anywhere the people all say, have a gosh dang beaver darn great damn day.